Every story leaves something behind. A whisper, a shadow, a question that was never answered. Here, we dig through the forgotten files, the unsolved mysteries, the chilling true crimes, and the horrors people wish had stayed buried. From haunted legends to real-life nightmares, every tale is pulled straight from the horror archives. So turn down the lights, put on your headphones, and step carefully, because once a story enters the horror archives, it never truly leaves. Night swims are supposed to be peaceful. The quiet water, the warm air, the feeling of having a pool or a lake all to yourself. But sometimes you're not as alone as you think. These 3 stories were sent in by viewers, and each one involves something deeply wrong that happened after dark, in or near the water. The first one is called The Light at the Bottom, and it's the kind of story where nothing violent happens, but every detail feels like it shouldn't exist. The pool light was on when I got home. I hadn't turned it on in 3 weeks. I'd actually been avoiding the backyard entirely since my neighbor Ed passed away. He'd had a heart attack in his own pool next door, and something about looking at the water at night just felt wrong after that. But there it was, this pale blue glow bleeding through the fence slats and up into the trees. I lived alone in a single-story ranch house in Gilbert, Arizona, the kind of neighborhood where every 3rd house has a pool, and nobody locks their side gates. It was mid-July, so even at 11 at night the air was over 100 degrees. I figured maybe the timer had tripped, some electrical thing. I grabbed a flashlight and walked out through the sliding glass door. The pool looked normal at first. The water was still. The light was doing that thing where it makes the surface look like shifting glass. But when I got closer, I noticed the water level was higher than I'd left it. Not by a lot, maybe 2 inches, enough that it was lapping at the very edge of the coping. I hadn't filled it. I hadn't run the hose in weeks. I knelt down, and that's when I saw something else. There were wet footprints on the concrete. They started at the deep end and went toward the fence that separated my yard from Ed's. Not away from the pool, like someone climbing out and leaving. Toward the fence and then back, like someone had climbed out, walked to the fence, and then returned to the water. I stood up and pointed the flashlight at the pool. The water was too bright from the light below to see the bottom clearly, so I went to the equipment panel on the side of the house and turned the pool light off. Then I walked back and looked down. There was something on the bottom. It was dark, about the size of a person, and it was in the deep end. Just a shape. I told myself it was a shadow, maybe a pool float that had sunk. But I didn't own any pool floats. I stared at it for a long time. And then it moved. Not like it drifted, not like the water shifted it. It moved the way a person moves when they reposition themselves. A slow, deliberate turn. I dropped the flashlight. It clattered on the pool deck and rolled into the water with a small splash. And now the only light was from the kitchen behind me, and the shape at the bottom was barely visible. I backed away and went inside and locked the sliding door. I watched from the window for almost an hour. Nothing came out of the water. Nothing disturbed the surface. In the morning, I went outside with sunlight and a pool skimmer. The water was clear. There was nothing on the bottom except my flashlight, but the water level was still 2 inches too high. And on the fence on Ed's side, there were wet handprints, 5 of them, spaced like someone had gripped the top of the fence and pulled themselves up to look over. Ed had been cremated. I confirmed that with his daughter. There was no body to be anywhere, but I drained that pool the next day, and I've never filled it again. The next story takes place at a remote quarry in Kentucky. It's called The Swimmer in the Quarry, and this one stayed with me because the thing they saw in the water wasn't swimming. It was just moving. There were 2 people in the quarry when we got there. There should have been 0. My friend Marcus and I used to drive out to an old limestone quarry about 40 minutes east of Bowling Green, Kentucky. It had filled up with rainwater over the years and become this deep, cold, impossibly clear swimming hole. The water was always dark green, almost black at the center, and nobody really knew how deep it was. We'd been going there since high school. We were 23 that summer. We pulled up around 10 at night. It was late August, still warm, and the sky was clear enough that you could see the Milky Way once your eyes adjusted. We parked on the gravel turnoff and hiked the short trail down to the ledge where everyone jumped from. That's when we saw them, two figures in the water, out near the middle, just their heads and shoulders visible. They weren't moving much, just treading water facing us. Marcus called out to them, asked if they were okay. His voice echoed off the rock walls and came back to us flat and distorted. Neither of them answered. We figured they were just other people who'd had the same idea. It wasn't unheard of, even though we'd never run into anyone out there that late. We set our stuff down and Marcus jumped in. I watched him swim out about 20 yards and then stop. He turned around and looked at me. Even in the dark, I could tell something was off. He swam back fast, faster than I'd ever seen him move in water, and pulled himself up onto the ledge. "They're not swimming," he said. He was breathing hard. "They're standing." I didn't understand at first. Then I did. The quarry was at least 60 feet deep at the center. There was nothing to stand on. No shelf, no submerged rock. We knew this because Marcus had actually free-dived it once and couldn't reach the bottom. But those two figures were upright in the water, not bobbing the way you do when you tread water. Just still, shoulders out, perfectly still. We watched them for maybe 5 minutes. They didn't move. They didn't speak. The water around them was flat. Then one of them started coming toward us. It didn't swim. That's the part I keep coming back to. There was no arm movement, no kicking. It just got closer, like it was being pulled on a track. A slow, steady approach across the surface of the water. Marcus grabbed my arm and said we need to leave. I didn't argue. We scrambled up the trail. When I looked back from the top of the ridge, I could see both figures had moved to the edge where we'd been sitting. They were at the base of the rock, and I swear to God one of them was climbing out. We ran to the car and left. On the drive back, Marcus wouldn't talk about it. He just kept checking the rearview mirror. 2 days later, I went on Google Earth and looked at the satellite image of the quarry. This was recent imagery from that same summer. I zoomed in on the water. There were 2 dark spots near the center of the quarry, perfectly round, perfectly spaced. I've looked at older satellite images from other years. The spots are in every single one. Every year, same position, same spacing. Marcus and I don't talk about the quarry, but we also don't talk to each other much anymore either. Something about that night changed the way we look at each other. Like we both know we saw something we can't explain, and that admitting it out loud would make it more real than either of us can handle. This last story is the one that disturbed me the most out of all 3. It's called The Lap Counter, and it's not set in some remote lake or abandoned quarry. It takes place at a public community pool with security cameras. What those cameras captured is something I don't think I'll forget. The community pool stayed open until 10, but the lap lanes were usually empty by 8:30. That's when I preferred to swim. I'm a high school swim coach in Dayton, Ohio, and I like to get my own laps in after the kids are gone. It's quiet. The overhead lights make the water look silver. There's something almost meditative about it when you're the only one there. Except on that Wednesday in October, I was the only one there. I'd been swimming for about 20 minutes when I noticed someone sitting in the bleachers on the far side of the pool deck. Just sitting. A man middle-aged, wearing a dark jacket. He wasn't in a swimsuit. He wasn't a parent. The youth practice had ended 2 hours ago. I stopped at the wall and pulled my goggles up. I asked him if he needed something. He didn't answer. He just held up his hand and extended 1 finger, then 2, then 3. He was counting my laps. I stared at him for a moment. Then I told him the pool was closing soon and that the front desk could help him if he needed anything. He lowered his hand and just sat there. I kept swimming. I don't know why. I think I convinced myself he was someone's dad who'd gotten confused about the schedule. But every time I came up for a breath on that side, he was watching me and his hand was moving, counting. At about 9:15, the lifeguard on duty, a college kid named Brent, came out of the office and walked over to me. He leaned down and asked if I knew the guy in the bleachers. I said no. Brent said the man had come in through the main entrance about 30 minutes ago and asked what time the coach swims. Not a coach. The coach, like he knew there was only one. Brent offered to ask him to leave. I said yes. I watched Brent walk over to the bleachers. He talked to the man for a minute. The man stood up, He was taller than I expected. He looked at me across the pool, and I felt something I can't quite describe. It wasn't fear exactly. It was recognition, like I was looking at someone who had been watching me for much longer than one evening. He left through the side door. Brent came back and said the guy was polite, didn't cause a problem, said he was just watching. Just watching. I finished my swim and showered and left. In the parking lot, my car was the only one, but there was something on my windshield, a folded piece of paper under the wiper blade. I opened it. It was a chart, handwritten, dates going back 6 weeks, days of the week, times, lap counts. My lap counts, every single session I'd swum at that pool for the past month and a half, was recorded on this chart. The exact number of laps, the exact time I arrived, the exact time I left. At the bottom, in small, neat handwriting, it said, "You're getting slower." I went to the police. They looked at the security footage from the parking lot. The man had arrived on foot. He walked in from the street, entered the building, and 38 minutes later walked back out the same way. The camera tracked him to the edge of the lot, and then he walked into the dark beyond the streetlights. They checked the footage from previous nights. He appeared on 6 of them, 6 different nights over the past 3 weeks, always arriving on foot, always entering the building. But here's the thing that made the officer pause when he showed me. On 4 of those 6 nights, the man entered the pool area through the deck door and sat in the bleachers. On the other 2 nights, he didn't go to the bleachers. He went into the pool. The footage showed him walking to the deep end, fully clothed, and lowering himself into the water. He stayed in the pool for the entire duration of my swim. In the lane next to mine, I never saw him. I never heard a splash. I never felt a ripple. But there he was on camera in the water, 6 feet away from me, his face just below the surface, watching me from underneath. The police never identified him. I stopped swimming at that pool. I stopped swimming at night entirely. But last week, I found another piece of paper on my car. This time it was in the driveway of my house. It said, "You stopped." I'm still counting.
And that's where tonight's file closes, but the archives are far from empty. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and join us as we uncover more horrors, mysteries, and true crimes hidden in the horror archives. Until next time, keep the lights low, keep listening, because you never know what story we'll uncover next.